What was another key takeaway? Really, he said further on that, he said,
Customers look at the end product.
they do, yes.
We have to take, take the customer to the market itself. Or
Yeah.
take the market to the customer itself.
Where I'm looking for one word and it begins with a B.
Benefit.
Who said that? Who said that? Somebody said, yeah, absolutely, very good. As he said, what amazing benefits can we bring to the consumer, right? And why do we recognize that to be important?
Because consumers don't buy acquisitions.
They buy benefits.
Buy benefits.
That's right, that's exactly right, yeah. So this is all fundamental, critically important thinking here. Great here. Right, okay, so here then we are going to look at this box here where we look at competitor targets. So therefore, armed with what I just said, thinking big, thinking conceptually, thinking broad, thinking business to business kind of perspective here, we can say, okay, well, how do we do this? Well, this is fundamentally how it's gonna work. What do we do as we seek to engage in an identification of competitor targets here? This is how we do it. We engage in what we call a market structure analysis, which serves to identify who the competitors are. When we have identified who the competitors are, which in and of itself is pretty murky, just look at the conversation we have here. So once we determine who the competitors are, what do we do then? We then determine their strengths and weaknesses, their future strategies, and compare their strengths and weaknesses against us. And that enables us then to formulate our appropriate market strategy moving forward. Got that? I will absolutely repeat it several times. I will be repeating it over and over again, actually. But it is, so more specifically then, like I said, what are we gonna do? We engage in this market structure analysis, which serves to identify what? Competitors. And then once we determine who the competitors are, we then analyze them with a view to determining their strengths, weaknesses, their future strategies, and compare it to us, our strengths and weaknesses, right? And that allows us, that informs what we have to do, right? So that is key. So why do we need to do this, by the way? What's another reason why? Why do we need to do this? Because if we are operating in the marketplace, which we are, you know, think of it as a sandbox. We need to know who's in the sandbox with us. And the reason why we need to know who is in the sandbox with us is because fundamentally, like I sort of rather sarcastically and facetiously said in a previous class, generally speaking, what do the folks who are in the sandbox with us, i.e. our competitors, what do they want to do? Do they want to destroy us? Yeah. Generally. Like I facetiously always ask you, would Coke like to put Pepsi out of business and usurp their customer base? Absolutely.
Yes.
Would Hyundai like to get all of Toyota's customers? 100%, for sure, and that's what they work very hard to do. So we need to know where the threats are. We need to know who the competition is because they will, you know, slither up behind us and slit our throat. We don't want that to happen. I don't want to use a rather dramatic language, but so this is what we want to do. So we will talk about that when we analyze it to try to figure this out. We also will be talking a little bit about SWOT. What is SWOT? Have we heard of SWOT before? Okay, what does it stand for?
Weakness, opportunities, and threats.
And two of those are internal to the firm, which are?
Strengths and weaknesses.
And external to the firm?
Opportunities and threats.
Right. Very good. Okay, so we will have a little bit of a refresher on that. We'll talk a little bit about game theory, and we will end off talking about marketing plans. So, diagrammatically then, what does all this look like? Like I said, this is basically what I said. I need words to it. This is sort of diagrammed out a little bit, very simple diagram. I think in terms of pictures. So, you know, when I can sort of put pictures and diagrams in, that helps me to make sense of the world. So that's all basically we're doing, right? So we are looking at trying to identify engaging in this market structure analysis to determine who the competitors are. Now, it is also worth saying that not only are we talking about our current competitors, but, future. We're also looking at the future, right? And this is our human, managerial, professional acumen and strength that we can bring to bear, right? And we can do that as humans, right? And again, moving forward for you guys, this is the kind of thinking you want to bring to bear, right? Because if you're not going to bring this kind of thinking to bear, then the employer need not hire you. All he or she needs to do then is to defer to, an AI kind of function and get the machine to do it. Easy peasy, right? And save a whole lot of hassle, right? But a machine cannot do this human kind of thinking and apply the stuff that we are talking about here, right? So this is a way of, personally differentiating yourself also. So this is important to look at it that way. So we determine that we engage in an analysis, as I've described, with a view to determining their strengths and weaknesses and comparing theirs to ours. So that's the kind of thinking we want to bring to bear. And we will start off then recognizing that what's the first thing we want to do here? We want to engage in market structure analysis. So there are a variety of ways by which we can do that. Two major ways, in fact. But before we get into those two major ways, what we want to do is to just remind you of, here we are, a little bit of motherhoodish terminology here, just to lay the groundwork here, but it's important, right? And here, like I said, I'm going to teach you the proper terminology. Once we get out into the real world, when you read the newspaper and the journals and talk to the practicing managers, it all gets very murky and everybody's very sloppy in their terminology, right? But here, you will see the right way. Okay, so when we first of all sort of try to do all of this, we need to recognize first up that there is what we call a product hierarchy, product industry hierarchy, okay? And that's the key thing. And we will talk about that momentarily. When we talk about how to do it, there are two major ways by which we can determine who the competitors are. First is what we call a demand-based approach, and secondly is what we call a supply-based kind of an approach. Two different approaches, completely different approaches. And so we may, in practice, want to do both or just one, depending on what we're up to, However, here we will talk about both. So that is how we determine who the competitors are. Now, again, in order to set the stage, let's talk about this product hierarchy. So what is that all about? Well, here essentially we are articulating in a very sort of sterile way these words here. We're talking about industry, overall industry, and under that big umbrella of industry, what do we have? We have a bunch of smaller umbrellas, numerous umbrellas that reside under that we call product class, or I like to call it category. Very often here we use the word class and categories interchangeably, so you can think of category up here. I tend to just out of habit use the word category. So we have different categories under the overall industry, and then we have different product types and variants as we drill into that, and residing at the very core are the various brands, right? So if we recognize this overall hierarchy in terms of terminology, then we can apply that to, say, housewares, right? And so this is sort of along the lines of questioning what I was asking before, but what do we have here? We basically have housewares, which is an industry, shall we say, the houseware industry. And so, what are we talking about here? We could be talking about, things like, dishes, pictures, appliances, decor, all that kind of thing, right? Different housewares, right? Under that, again, a bunch of different umbrellas, of which one is product categories. Different product categories. So here we have an example of one product category, which here we are calling food preparation appliances. So what might be under that umbrella, do you think? How about something like coffee makers, slow cookers, pressure cookers, food preparation appliances, food processors, right? These are different food preparation appliances, right? All under that product category, shall we say, of food preparation appliances. Furthermore, when we drill in under that umbrella, we see a variety of other umbrellas that we can call product types. And so here we have different product types, and these product types that you see here, let's look at one product type and let's, look at specifically coffee makers, right? So coffee makers could be one, and then what do we do here? We then drill into that and look at, different variants of coffee makers, such as drip coffee makers, such as percolators, such as, let's say, what are some other variants? Products that make coffee. We have the drip, right? Plug it in, basket, water, press a button, right? Drip.
Yeah.
How about something like your French press, as they call it, made by the brand name Bodum, I guess it's called Bodum, right? You know what that is?
Unfortunately, I'm not a coffee person, so yeah, but I guess so.
French press. Anybody have they call it generally a French press here? Yeah, you like that? Yeah? Describe to all of us how it works.
So Professor, you have to put the grinding part and then put the hot water and then there's a press inside that. So you just press it down so it just filters down the actual the coffee part and
Yep.
the grind part just goes down and you just have to enjoy that.
Is that your favorite apparatus of
It is.
choice? Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So you have a basically pot, a glass pot, typically with a handle, and you take whatever amount of coffee, you put it in, put the boiling water in, stir it up a little bit to get it going, and then you take the plunger, which is a plunger that has a perforated, apparatus at the bottom of it. You take it and you plunge it down, which pushes the ground coffee to the bottom, resulting in hopefully pure kind of coffee without any residue in it, ready to use. That's a plunger pot. I always like to ask this question, and for years I was using the word percolator, and it only came to light like a year or two ago that students had absolutely no idea what a percolator was. Right? Does anybody know what a percolator is? Yeah? No? So it is a way of making coffee, not used that much anymore. And they come in various sizes. You can get small ones or bigger ones. But the way that it worked, a percolator worked, and when I was a kid growing up, that was sort of a primary means by which coffee was made. But anyway, the way it works is that, you can have plug-in ones that supply heat, or you can take smaller ones and put it on a stove. But basically the way it works is that you take the coffee, you take the pot, you fill it with water, and then within the pot there is like a little basket thing, or it could be bigger, a basket thing with a perforated bottom on it. And so you put the coffee in it, and it is sitting on a stem, essentially. So it sits on top of the container. Put a cover on it, apply heat one way or another, and then what happens there? The water will start to boil. And when the water starts to boil, it'll percolate over the coffee grinds, and it will circulate that way. And that's how the coffee is made. Yeah, that way. And that's what we call a
Percolator.
percolator. Yeah. Okay, so we have that, right? So yeah, we have different variants, right? One variant is like a drip, one is percolator, French press, maybe espresso could be another one, an espresso machine, that kind of thing. Right? So you get that. And then, of course, when we start looking at the different features or attributes and that kind of thing of each here, then we look at the different brands, right? So at the center of it then is, am I gonna buy brand A or brand
Brand
B? Am I
B.
gonna, in this context, am I gonna buy a Black and Decker or a Braun? My personal one that I have at home is a Braun coffee maker, or a Braun, or a GE, or whatever, right? The brands. And that typically is how most people think of competition, right? Competition between these brands, right? Which is really the narrowest form of competition, by the way. But the point that I make here, and the reason why I bring this out, is twofold. Number one, I want to articulate to you some of these words that we use all the time, like product category and industry and variants and brands. I want to sort of introduce you to that from a hierarchical perspective, very important. And secondly, I also want to say that, when we talk about competition, fundamentally, every layer here that we have just described, you can look at competition that exists at every layer here. Fundamentally, there is essentially a type of competition that exists between a drip coffee maker and a French press or a percolator, right? Yeah, there was competition there. Coffee makers, What about coffee makers versus, a slow cooker? Competition there, right?
Yeah.
What about housewares? What about a chair versus a set of dishes versus something you put on a wall? Decor. That's the type of competition too, right? So at this point then, the key takeaway here is that competition is very broad and it can exist in a variety of
Different
levels.
hierarchies.
And again, I revert back to the initial point that I made, and that is that competition can come in numerous shapes and sizes. And that's the point that I'm trying to convey to you here. Now, if we rely solely on the product hierarchy in order to assess competition with a view to determining who the competitors are, that is highly problematic for us as marketers. And it's problematic because primarily the consumer really doesn't see any differences in many respects, doesn't really see that there is competition, as you guys just brought out here in our initial conversation. They don't see that, in fact, competition exists. They don't see that there is competition between, like we were saying, buying chips versus going to see a movie. They don't see it, but you will agree that that is competition. They don't see that there's a type of competition between a coffee maker versus a slow cooker, right? They don't see that. So this is a key thing. So therefore we ask ourselves, okay, well, how do we address this kind of nebulous kind of situation? And the answer to that then comes by looking at two primary frameworks that we can use. The first one, like I said, is what we call the demand-based approach. And the second one is what we call what do we call it? Supply-based approach. So we'll talk about the demand-based approach first. Key thing to remember when we talk about the demand-based is this, that we look at the demand-based approach from the perspective of the consumer. Okay? Whereas, and we will talk about this later, whereas when we look at the supply-based approach, here we are looking at it using external objective criteria. And that will come to light momentarily. However, for now, let's then look at the demand-based approach. So when we talk about the demand-based approach then, here is the key thing. Again, to emphasize, it is from the customer's perspective. And when we look at the demand-based approach, we look at it typically from a four-layered hierarchical kind of a framework. So the first sort of domain here that we want to look at is competition that exists that we call budget competition. Budget competition. And simply put, when we talk about budget competition, this is competition that exists for products that can use the same discretionary budget. the same dollars. So in other words, budget, it's that competition for dollars. And that's what I described earlier, right? Do I go to see a movie or do I buy food? Right? Do I fill up my car with gas or do I get a grocery order? Which sadly, given inflationary trends, are key decisions that a lot of people, in fact, are being forced to make, by the way. So budget competition. So the key thing to remember when we talk about budget competition, get this in your mind. I'll give you a little trick. Budget dollars. That's how you remember that. Budget is about the competition that exists for the dollars that you have in your pocket, and particularly discretionary dollars. Generic is the next one. When we talk about generic here, generic really is where we look at products essentially that fulfill the same needs. So when we have products that fulfill the same needs, between them, that's a type of competition too, and that's what we call generic. Yeah. So what would be an example of something like that? How about something like beverage making machines, right? So therefore, there's generic competition, if you will, between water purifiers and say juicers and say drip coffee makers, right? They're beverage making, apparatus, right? Same need is being fulfilled essentially. So therefore, there is competition in that regard also. So that is yet another type of competition that exists. And so when we look at it that way, we can determine who is doing that, and that forms who our competition is. The third sort of level, if you will, of competition is what we call product category, right? Product category competition. And here we're looking at those products with similar features that provide the same basic function. The same basic function. So product category is about function. Product category is about function, same function. So an example of that might be something like your espresso machine versus drip machine versus percolator machine. Generally, same function, makes coffee, right? So that is what we call product category competition. And then the last sort of broad level, I'd say level, not really that broad, but the last sort of level, if you will, is actually the narrowest form of competition. And that's what we call product form competition. And essentially the way to think of product form competition is that the emphasis is on sort of at the type
Features.
level and specifically with brands. So here, product form, it's about the competition that exists between brand A versus brand B versus brand C. That is what we call the narrowest form. So if I were to say to you, as I might well do on the 1st of March, I don't know, and or on the final exam, what is the narrowest form of competition? Product form would be correct. That's right. So that is what we recognize then as being, the demand-based kind of an approach. Now, we can, even if we wanted to, as we will now, we could take everything that we've just spoken about and superimpose that onto our existing product hierarchy as we have spoken about. And we can link it up there to further reinforce the two notions that we just talked about, demand-based versus product hierarchy. So really, when we look at it that way, we see then that at the broad level here, at the industry level, so to speak, we have budget competition that really spans, the industry, and it spans category, right? Product category. Really, that's the budget level kind of competition that we describe. And then we can drill into that and look at the different product types, and that's at that point that we look at the generic competition that I talked about before. We can drill into that even and look at product form competition, which really is at the center here when we talk about brands, right? And here then we would be looking at the different brands for drip coffee makers here in this diagram, right? So that's the way that we can look at it that way. So the key thing to remember then is that demand-based, 4 levels, 4 aspects to it, First is what we call budget, which is about dollars. Second is generic, which is about what? Need.
Needs.
Third is the product category or class, which is about function. And then the product form, the narrowest is brands. Absolutely. Very good, very good. Okay, so we get that. Now, that is a way by which we can figure out who the competition is. Good. So, at this point, your thinking should be, there's a lot more to this whole competition thing that we initially had considered, right? Am I right? Okay, so demand base. What did I say the second one was again? Supply base. And here, oh, sorry, before we get into supply base, okay. Sorry, I got ahead of myself here. So then the question becomes, okay, what do we do from a marketing perspective then? As marketers, how do we deal with each one of those levels of demand-based supply, demand-based competition? And so here we recognize that generally when we're talking about budget competition and generic competition, from a marketing perspective, you know, we tend to pretty well do the same thing, right? And so here, the key thing here is to recognize then that we need to try to convince consumers of the superiority of a particular product category in filling their needs. That's the genesis of the thinking as marketers that we bring to bear at each one of those levels pretty well. So in other words, like I said, how do we convince consumers of the product category? So that's the focus of our efforts, right? The product category, you know, and we need to build that into our ability to convince consumers. So in other words, we might want to sort of convince consumers that, you know, juicers are the best category, right? Over, say, water purifiers, you know, in terms of satisfying their needs, right? So then we get into the product category competition, and here we're trying to convince consumers, you know, that our product really is the best in the category, best at fulfilling the function, right? So in other words, here we want to say, okay, relative to drip coffee makers, relative to percolators, our you know, plunger is the optimal. That's sort of the focus, right? That's the conceptual thinking that we bring to bear. And we can build a whole, you know, advertising campaign all around that. We can superpose it with sales promos and all that kind of built around that concept. And then lastly, we have product form competition, which, as I said, is the narrowest form. And here, this is where we are essentially taking aim at direct competitors. So here, if we are a Braun North American brand and manager for the coffee maker, you know, we would take direct aim at, say, GE or Procter Silex or other companies. So here, and that I would argue is probably the most critical form of competition, yeah? So here then, we can get into what we call supply-based, and using this system, fundamentally, this system is based on an objective criteria. So let me give you, using external data, external to the firm. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, it's something like this. In North America, we spoke about this before, but in North America, we have a major trade agreement. And what is that major trade agreement called?
Yes.
USMCA, right? Formerly known as NAFTA.
NAFTA.
So we have USMCA, and as part of NAFTA/USMCA, we have what we call an NA merged out of that, what we call the NAICS, which stands for the North American Industry Classification System. And that is a huge framework. It's a huge, huge system that is available numerous places. Most notably, it is all publicly available in the Stats Canada website. So what does that means then that, let's say we want to open let's say a yoga studio. We want to do a yoga studio in Windsor, let's say, okay? Now, if we are doing our business function properly, consistent with what we're talking about, what do we need to do? We need to figure out who the competition is, right? Who are the competitors out there, right? And that will drive a whole bunch of stuff, right? But we need to figure out who the competitors are. So that is the questions on the table. How do we do it? Well, one way to do it, in addition to demand-based kind of approach, another approach is to use the supply-based kind of approach. And more specifically here, we could use a tool that is a supply-based approach called the NAICS. So what do we do there? And I've used it before. How do we do it? We go onto the website, we sift through everything, we look through, and we will see listing, for example, yogas, I'm just pulling this out of the top of my head, but we could see something like yoga studios, fitness studios, personal training studios, right? And so we would see that listing under that kind of heading. We're yoga, so we see that. So therefore, we conclude then that pursuant to that framework, our major competition then is who? Fitness studios,
Gyms.
we're yoga studios, yoga, fitness, and what else did I say? Whatever other studios I said. So we can see that, and it's all listed. It's all listed out for us. We just have to go in and look at it, and it's all listed out. So it's a thing of beauty from that perspective, and you can see who, from a structural perspective, is our competition. Now, the problem with that is that it doesn't really account for the consumer, right? That's the problem with that, but that way we could also defer to using a demand-based kind of approach. Another way of looking at it, and I did it fairly recently too, is that, you know, if we were in the auto sector, we could tap into various journals. For example, there is one high-level professional journal called Automotive News, which is an international system, an international journal. They do all kinds of very advanced analysis on the auto sector. And, you know, one thing that they do every few months or every few years is that they produce a very comprehensive framework of the auto sector. So you will look into that and see, import exotic cars and all the brands that are listed there. You'll see, sport utility vehicles, you'll see hybrids, you'll see all the different categories of vehicles. And then under each of the categories, you'll see all the brands. So if you are a brand manager for a particular brand, you could look at, that listing and see, there's the direct competition at the brand level that I work with. So that's very helpful too. So yeah, NAICS is one. There are other frameworks that, journals produce and that kind of thing. That's another source. All with a view to tapping into supply-based kinds of processes. Very useful from that perspective. And there are, potentially internal sources to the firm that might engage in that kind of analysis and that kind of thing. So that is key, because we realize that, generic and budget level kinds of competition are very difficult to determine. So this might prove quite useful. So two major ways by which we can determine who the competitors are. And that's where we are. So therefore, once we determine who's in the sandbox with us, what do we do next? We then determine their strengths and weaknesses and weigh up ours against theirs. So yeah, we determine what are their objectives. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to maximize profits? Are they trying to grow? What are they trying to do, right? What are their overall, corporate strategic goals here? We need to determine what they're consistent with that. What's their overall strategy? What are their strengths and weaknesses? How do we match up against them? And importantly, we need to determine theirs and ours future strategies based on that, right? It will inform our future strategies, knowing all this, right? In the face of competition. So that is key. So let's have a look at each one of these and unpack each one. Let's start off with talking about objectives then. when we talk about objectives, fundamentally, it really drives future strategies, right? So here we're trying to assess objectives, and when we do that, it gives us insight into the competition's functioning, right? It gives us insight into their future strategies, you know, and we can do that. How do we do that then? How do we do that? How about direct observation? We could just look at them and see what they're doing, right? Direct observation. We could go in and, you know, do visits of their manufacturing facility. We could look at what kind of health ads they were putting in newspapers and online. You know, we could talk possibly to employees that work there, you know, so there are a bunch of ways that we can do that. So what are they trying to do, right? What are they trying to do? What are their future strategies? And this might be easier and it might be a little bit more challenging depending. I mean, if we are talking about a publicly traded company, you know, it's a little easier because, I mean.
The information is
What's that?
available. The information is publicly available.
Absolutely. Financial disclosure requires that much of this information has to be made public, right? If it's publicly traded, and so therefore it's very easy to obtain that kind of information, right? If it's private, then it's a little bit more challenging, not impossible, but a little bit more challenging, right? So we realize that. Furthermore, we could also use, you know, look at the ownership. What is the ownership configuration, right? What is the status? Like I said, is it purely a private company, or is it publicly traded, or what is going on with that? And that will give us insight there. Indeed, it could be another government organization. It could be an NGO, or it could be a not-for-profit organization. It could be a charity, you know? So what is the ownership, right? That tells us a lot. We also want to determine, you know, what is their current strategy, right? We've spoken about their future strategy. What is their current strategy, you know? What are their competitor targets? Who do they see as a competitor target? Who do they see as competition? Importantly also, who do they see as being their consumers, right? Who are their consumer targets, right? And that's easy enough to figure out. You know, what product features do they bring? Are they developing new product features? Are they expanding their brand portfolio? What are they doing on the product side, right? What about their core strategies? You know, what are they trying to do? Are they focused on growth? Or are they trying to solidify something and differentiate themselves relative to the competition? That's the kind of thinking that we bring to bear here to try to pin this all down, right? And then, of course, we can have a look at their 4 Ps, right? I gave you an example of that last week when we looked at Monsanto Roundup, right? So if we're a competitor in that herbicide kind of product category, well, you know, we would absolutely want to look at a key competitor like Roundup and their 4P configuration, right?
Yeah.
So that is, again, the kind of thinking that we bring to bear here with that. And then, of course, we look at their strengths and weaknesses, you know. Namely, we could look at strengths and weaknesses, you know, vis-a-vis their abilities, you know. What is their ability to develop new products, you know? Do they emphasize, is it a strategic concern of theirs to develop new products, yeah? How about something like Big Pharma? Do they devote a lot of effort to R&D
R&D, yes.
with a view to developing new pharma products? Yeah, that's the lifeblood of the company, right? Absolutely they do. How about something opposite end of the spectrum? How about something like H&R Block tax preparation service? Are they developing new products, new services? No.
Not really.
What about something like maybe your Tim Hortons? Are they, you know, spending a lot of effort on R&D to develop new product offerings in Tim Hortons? Not so much.
Not that.
Not so much. Occasionally they'll come up with a
Not a
new product, but
substantial
that's about
amount.
it. You know, so yeah, not so much. So it all depends, right? What about production facilities? Yeah. What kind of production facilities do they have? What is the state of their manufacturing? You know, to what extent are they involved in, you know, robotic manufacturing, for example? You know, how do they manufacture things? How do they produce stuff? you know, and in turn, resultantly, what kind of quality do they produce? And we need to figure this out, right? Because that could be a strength or it could be a weakness, you know? That might really, when we consider that, that might really allow us to differentiate our product against the competition. If they produce products that are, you know, not so good
Not so good.
quality, maybe we could provide, you know, superb
Quality
quality, for
assurances.
example. How do they market? How do they market their products, which is key, right? Some, you know, big corporations are, you know, fundamentally oriented towards marketing. I would argue that, you know, Nike is fundamentally a marketing organization, right? Yeah, they do some R&D for sure, and that's about it. You know,
Mm.
primarily marketing, secondarily R&D, I would suggest. Are they
Customer
are they a
acquisition.
manufacturing organization per se, Nike? No, absolutely
Not
not.
really.
They outsource. They outsource all their
Everything.
manufacturing, right? So they do that. That's just the way it works well for them, right? What about the financial structure, right? Is that a strength or a weakness, right? Are they consistently operating in the red? Are they, you know, accumulating successive budgetary deficits? Are they carrying a heavy debt or not? That's a key thing. What kind of
Liquidity,
expansion
leveraging.
are they involved in, right? And typically when we see firms that are expanding considerably, taking over, merging, acquiring other firms, building their brand portfolios, that comes at a cost. And typically that cost then has to be financed.
Yeah.
And typically when that happens, then they have a likelihood to carry more
The debt.
debt.
Yeah.
And if that's happening, then what do we look at? We look at the firm's ability
Assets.
to
Leverage their assets and
leverage and
debts.
cover the debt. And if they can cover the debt based on cash flow and everything, that's a good thing, right? That's a good thing. So debt is not necessarily a bad thing. It's basically, can they carry it? Are they carrying it in a financially
Sustainable
attractive
manner.
way? That's the issue. Right? What about management, right? Management, strengths and weaknesses of management. Who's operating? Who's
Leadership
running the
style
show?
as well.
Who's in the C-suite, right? Who are the decision makers? Unless you think that that is not important, I would defer you, I think I might have mentioned to you before, that I would defer you to the brilliant Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, one of the world's most, you know, wealthiest persons living in Nebraska. I mean, Warren Buffett, he said that the number one thing that he looks at before making any investment decision is
The management.
who is the management, who is running
the
the
company.
show, right? Most important thing for him. So that is key. And he also said, by the way, just as an aside, he also said, especially for consumer products, he said one of the key things is, does the firm have the ability to delight the consumer?
Yes.
And when we use the word delight, that is a word that we use to mean create super duper satisfaction.
Exceptional.
High, exceptional satisfaction. What do we call that? Delight.
Delight.
And that's what we want to do, delight the consumers. And Warren Buffett said that's a key thing, he himself. So that's the kind of thinking that we bring to bear here. And then, you know, when we look at it that way, we say, okay, how about our own strengths and weaknesses? How do we compare? And there are a bunch of different ways, there's an infinite number of ways that we can compare ourselves. We could, you know, adopt a fairly, you know, analytical perspective and look at our key success factors. What does it take to really win? And then look at ourselves and compare to the competition, right? You know, we could engage in SWOT analysis, which we also know. So those are ways by which we can do it. Now, SWOT. That brings us to SWOT then. SWOT is a useful tool that we can use. We've already said what SWOT is, right?
Yeah.
So what is SWOT? It's all about, as we say, it's all about trying to establish and determine the overall strategic situation as it exists, as well as the future kind of outward-looking orientation, all flowing out of that. So, SWOT. we recognize that when we talk about SWOT, it's all about looking internally at our strengths and weaknesses and also looking externally at the opportunities and threats that exist out there, right? And that's what a SWOT is all about. So let me tell you this then. When we talk about SWOT, yes, it is inward and outward, and yes, we need to look outward because we need to be very cautious about becoming overly consumer-centric. In other words, we want to avoid a potential pitfall of consumer-centrism. Now, you will remember our first couple of classes, and certainly during our consumer behavior class, when we talked about Steve Jobs. What did Steve Jobs say? It's about the experience, it's about the benefits and everything else. In other words, it's about adopting what I call that consumer-centric approach. Adopting, the consumer as the centerpiece of everything that we do, consumer-centric approach. So then the question becomes, well, is there a potential pitfall to that? And the potential pitfall is this, that we might become overly myopic in our thinking. And in other words, we do not want to become overly consumer-centric at the expense, here's the point, at the expense of losing sight of what's happening in the competitive landscape. That's my point. So yes, absolutely, adopt a consumer-centric approach, no doubt, for sure. But do not do it at the expense of losing sight of the competitive landscape. Do not do it at the expense of everything we're talking about today, I guess is the point, right? And so therefore, SWOT allows us to facilitate that. It allows us then it forces us, the little simple framework, it forces us to look outside, to avoid becoming overly myopic. You understand what I'm saying? Are you getting all this? Yeah. Very important thing here in terms of conduct of business. So therefore, when we talk about SWOT, yeah, it's about those strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. Here's the thing. Any monkey can list, any child can create a list of strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats. AI can do that. That's no big deal. Here's the thing, and this is how you differentiate yourself and make yourself valuable to the employer. And this is how we as humans differentiate ourselves from AI, right? It's very important now, right? That should be our thinking. What kind of value added can we bring to the job, to the position? What kind of value can we bring to the employer, right?
Yeah.
Because we could just sit back and say, I don't feel like thinking about this, disagree with this. In which case the employer would say, okay, thanks, you're fired, have a nice day, right? In which case you pack your bags up and you go home and you watch Netflix, right? But not for long because you won't be able to pay for Netflix because you don't have a job. But that's the kind of thing. So we want to try to make ourselves very valuable and indispensable. And how do we do that? By providing all this kind of forward thinking to the organization. That's how we do it. So therefore, here, when we talk about a SWOT, how do we do it? Yes, we definitely engage in that analytical kind of perspective. We pull out those strengths and weaknesses and got it. But you know what? The key thing here is that we need to extract meaning and knowledge out of each one of those points that we develop. Each point that we identify, we need to develop a whole train of thought emerging out of each one of those points. And that is the basis of a good SWOT analysis versus some kind of low-end kind of AI-generated list of mumbo jumbo. So what do I mean by that now? Well, take this example. Let's say, for example, we have unfortunately lived with, let's say, 2 years of progressive market share decline. Right? Let's say. So what is a weakness for us? A weakness for us then is, you know, a declining market share, let's say. That's a weakness. So having identified that, what do we do? Just say, done, walk away and try to identify another weakness?
We want
Well,
to rectify that weakness.
the superficial lazy person would do precisely that. In which case they typically won't last long in any organization. But the professional, managerial, forward-thinking person will say, we need to extract this. So then the question becomes, in the execution of a SWOT, we determine a particular point, and then we ask ourselves, and this is the thing, we ask ourselves, so what? Get an answer. And then based on that answer, we say, so what? So what? So what? So what? So what? Or
Yes.
therefore, 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 therefore. In other words, we extract all the information we possibly can out of that point that we identified. Until our back is against the wall, we can't go any further. That is thinking, and that's the kind of thinking we want to bring to bear in this kind of an analysis. It's a very simple analysis. I mean, there's nothing complicated here, but to do it properly and do it in a comprehensive way, as I described it to you, does take a lot of energy and effort to do it well. So what would that look like? Well, let's say, for example, we have 2 years of declining market share, weakness, boom. Well, like I said, we're not just going to listen and walk away. That doesn't do anything. What do? We say, okay, so what? Well, there are a variety of so whats. One major so what is, okay, what's the cause of it, right? What's the cause of it? So what? What's the cause of it? Well, what is the cause of it? Then we engage in a cause-effect kind of analysis, and then we look at, say, what are some of the potential causes of that? Is it shifting consumer tastes? Is it competitor actions? Is our marketing mix ineffective? Is our pricing too high? Are our products not meeting the needs and wants of the customer? Are the competitors doing something? Are we suffering in terms of quality? That kind of a thing, right? And so let's say we engage in that kind of a thing and we say, okay, our quality is diminishing. So what? Well, then we need to take action then to address our quality. So we need to talk to the manufacturing guys and figure out how to figure all that out, right? And that is a key deliverable then that has emerged out of that one weakness by asking the question, so what, so what, so what, for an example, right? So that is the kind of thinking. So, in this kind of a structure, from a structural perspective, if you're doing it, you want to, using that kind of a layout, you want to get the bullets on it. And then at the bottom of that, you want to take each one of those and discuss it and analyze each one of those bullets in a way that I described to you. And you do that, and you will have performed, after many, many hours and days and weeks, you will have performed a masterful analysis of the business. And that is key. And your employer will love it for it. So that is the key. That's the kind of thinking we bring to bear. Right, so SWOT is important. And then, of course, we need to determine, after going through all that, we need to determine, okay, what are the future actions here? What's going on in the future, for us and for the competitors? What kind of likely actions will the competition take, Again, it relates to their strategies versus ours. What are the major trends? What are the major trends in the marketplace, And there are a variety of ways that we can sort of engage in this kind of strategic what-if kind of analysis, which is essentially like a wargaming kind of a thing, right? If we raise our prices across the board for all of our products by, 3%, which is, what some of the cellular providers do, right? They will say, okay, let's raise everything by, say, 5%, right? Then the question becomes, okay, what will the competition do? Will the competition respond in kind, or will they not respond? In which case we then we propel ourselves to the higher priced option within the marketplace. And then that might be feasible depending on, what we have to offer the consumers and all that kind of stuff. So it all depends, right? But that is the kind of thinking that we bring to bear. So to help us do that then, we could engage in various types of simulation, and embedded in that is possible role playing, right? So you get managers together and you say, okay, you're the brand manager for brand A, you're brand B, brand C, and I will be our brand. If I do this, what are you going to do in terms of your pricing? What are you going to do in terms of some of your basic product attributes? And so you will do this and that. What will you do in relation to that and in relation to me? And so you engage in this role-playing thing and you push each other, and that's a key way of doing it, right? And that is very important stuff here that I am delivering to you. We could even adopt a very formal kind of a process and use some simulation kind of softwares and simulation techniques, and there are a wide variety of simulation, automated, software packages that can help us do that. We could get very, very formal and use, basic what we call game theory. And, it's not my intention to get into game theory in detail here and now. It sort of, in my opinion, lies outside the scope of this course, this basic introductory level course. However, I do expect you to know what game theory is. And that is a code word for saying, if I expect you to know it, that's where and how I'm going to be testing it. Right? So, what is game theory all about? Game theory is really a formalized mathematical approach to decision making. And it is based on some key premises here. It's fundamentally based on a non-cooperative kind of game theory that really tends to predict
Non-cooperative.
It's like a football. Right? It's like we're at a stadium. Okay, what did I just say?
Non-cooperative mathematical elements.
What?
Game theory is a theory based on non-cooperative mathematical elements.
Yes, exactly. So when we talk about game theory, I mean, one of the major kind of approaches to it is based on sort of a non-cooperative kind of predictive thing where we try to predict the behavior of, and this is a major assumption too, by the way, of a rational, intelligent kind of firm, which is competing independently. And by the way, if your strategy guy is doing his job, he will be teaching you that one of the major kind of assumptions in strategy is the work of Simon, which is, the assumption that many firms are rational thinking organizations, right? That's the sort of the theoretical assumption that is used in many of the theoretical approaches associated with strategy, by the way. And that comes from the work of Simon, the rational firm, if you will. At any rate, that's a theory, strategy kind of a thing. So at any rate, it's based on that non-cooperative kind of notion that I just mentioned. So furthermore, when we talk about game theory, and this is important, do capture this and do know this, because you might see it later. When we talk about game theory, there are typically some essential elements here. First of all, to engage in game theory, like I said, that math, and there are a variety of formal mathematical kind of approaches to it. But generally speaking, there's some key elements. The first key element is a list of participants and players, right? So you need that. The second thing is that you need a associated list of strategies for each player. And the third thing is that you need a payoff matrix. A payoff matrix of the reward and costs for each of the combinations of strategies. A payoff matrix. A payoff matrix of rewards and costs for each combination of strategies. So game theory then consists of those three elements. I'll say it again. A list of participants. Second is a list of strategies for each player. And thirdly is a payoff matrix. Three things, right? And those are the three essential components that you need for game theory. Now, there are a variety of mathematical approaches like this. Do you want me to say it again?
Player strategies. Matrix.
Any questions? You want me to? I'm happy to repeat it if you want me to. They're not listening to me. Okay, so anyway, let's carry on. So then the question becomes then, okay, where do we get information? We're talking about getting information, right? Which is the basis of everything that we're talking about. Where do we get information? Right, as we wrap up here. Where do we get information? Well, we can get information from a variety of sources, right? Certainly, as I've said, from a secondary source kind of a thing, external firm, if you will, we can get it, from trade, patent filings, online sources like government statistics. We can look at help wanted ads. We could get consultant reports, a whole bunch of things like that. We could also tap into some more primary kinds of sources and look at, the workings of our own suppliers, our own employers, employees, and all that kind of a thing. Another way that we could get information also is by reverse engineering products, right? Which is especially important in software, in technology, manufacturing, especially important in, big pharma. I mean, it's guaranteed. I mean, when one, major pharmaceutical company introduces a new FDA-approved, medication, cancer medication into the marketplace, and Pfizer does that, you can rest with 100% certainty knowing that Merck will get said drug and reverse engineering to determine exactly what the composition of the drug is. So reverse engineering is used a bit. So there's a multitude of ways by which we can get information is the point. So as we sort of wind down here, let's talk a little bit about marketing plans. And before we talk about marketing plans, I just want to emphasize to you one thing here that I mentioned a few times so far, but it's worth putting a stake in the ground, and I want you to know what it's about. When we talk about this very important metric that we call market share, what is market share? What is market share?
Percentage the company has in the market, like what's the rate of product that customers buy from the company?
Yeah, how do we get it? You're absolutely right. How do we get it?
Through the analysis.
Through the analysis.
We find out the total volume of sales, and then we compare it with our portion of the sales and try to figure out like what portion.
What though? That's
the competitors, and we try to find out the sales volume of the competitors, add it all up, and then figure out how much we're selling in proportion to the industry.
Absolutely. So it basically captures essentially, how big is our piece of the pie?
Yeah.
Because the pie is very finite. generally, depending on how we define it, but it is very finite. So yeah, essentially that's it. So how do we think of it then? We could use, revenue-based, more financial kind of based approaches to market share, but more often than not, we look at sales, right? Sales volume, general, not necessarily, but very often. And so the way to think of market share, important point here, is like this. Market share equals us over us plus them. And that's essentially what we just said. So let's write it down just for fun. Market share.
Us divided by them.
What did I say it was? Tell me.
Us over them.
Over. Okay, and that's the thing to remember, right? Very simple. But when we talk about them, we're talking about all those competitors, right? That are producing the drip coffee maker, all our competitors in the market that are producing the drip coffee maker. What kind of sales do they have? You add it up, basically. What do we produce? That gives us, the state of the market, if you will, for coffee makers in Canada, say, if that's our concern. And we put ours over that, and that gives us proportionally our slice of the pie, which is exactly what you said. So that's a key thing. Now, when we talk about marketing plans, we should, notwithstanding the fact that you're not going to be doing one per se, I still expect you to know what they are and how they work, basically. And so the key thing then to ask ourselves is, okay, well, what is a marketing plan? Well, we can think of a marketing plan as essentially being a written document that articulates marketing efforts, essentially, guidelines, if you will, for the marketing programs and associated allocations of resources over a planning period. So what did I just say? I said that it's a written document that contains guidelines for the marketing program with associated resource allocations over a period of time. That's basically what it is, right? That's essentially what it is. So embedded in that is an analysis and a whole bunch of stuff, right? That's essentially what it is. And we recognize then that a marketing plan can be primarily for an internal audience, or it can be for an external audience too. So it could be for bankers, it could be for investors mainly, it could be for both, it could be for employees rather, it could be for external or whatever, right? It could be both. So that's a key thing. So fundamentally then, we recognize that, like I said, it is typically a written document, right? It should be easy to communicate, and it should be communicable, within the organization and to external sources, depending. And fundamentally, it articulates what the product strategies are over a period of time, like I said. And so what does that all mean? That means then that a plan, here a marketing plan and a business plan, a plan is not a rear-facing document, right? We're not looking at the past here, really. We're looking into the future. So a marketing plan then is a future-looking. It's an outward-looking, front-looking, future-oriented document. So essentially then, and this is how I like to think of it, when we talk about a marketing plan then, it's a document that recognizes and establishes where we are now in time and takes us to some point in the future.
So it's like a bridge.
That's what a plan does, especially a marketing plan does. So here the emphasis on the marketing program, right, which is the marketing mix, which is the 4 Ps with appropriate allocation of resources you know, how much is this gonna cost? We need to cost it all out, right, with appropriate financial estimates and all that kind of thing, right? So that is the thinking into the future. And that future is articulated by how? We're here now, we need to go there. How do we capture and articulate in the plan the future piece? How do we do that? By establishing marketing, in this case marketing, objectives. By establishing marketing objectives. And objectives really capture where we want to go. So objectives are critically important here. Critically important. Very difficult to formulate, but we need to spend a lot of time and effort formulating them, developing them, articulating them, and ensuring that they basically support the overall strategic orientation of the firm. So when we talk about the need for objectives, here's yet another important thing, and that is, how do we articulate objectives appropriately well? What is the little acronym that we should always strive to fulfill?
SMART.
SMART, exactly right. And that stands for what?
Strategy.
Specific,
measurable,
achievable, attainable,
time bound.
realistic,
time.
yeah, relevant, and T is
Time bound.
time, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So therefore, we establish, typically our, year one objectives, maybe year two objectives, and, into the future, 5-year objectives, right? And we can even go further than that, depending on the nature of the organization. Has anybody here talked about or heard of a major furniture retailer here called Tepperman's? Anybody heard of the word Tepperman here? Yeah, major furniture retailer. They sell furniture here and a bunch of furniture. Yeah, well, I know the owners quite well, Noah and Andrew Tepperman, and they tell me that fundamentally an important aspect, a bunch of very good guys, ethical business, great business actually. So, but they really emphasize the need for thinking not only 5 years, not only 1 year, not only 2 years, not only 5 years. They think like 10 or 20 years into the future. And they have internal working groups and that kind of thing where they force themselves to think, where are we going to be in 10 years? What do we want to look like in 20 years? And they go through this exercise, right? Which is hard, right? It's difficult to do. So they go through this exercise and they tell me that it is remarkably beneficial for them to really set their overall strategic orientation for the firm. Anyways, that's the kind of thinking we bring to bear. And of course, like I said, in marketing, we want to do everything, right? But we are bound extensively by available resources, like I'm always saying to you. And that's why it's important then for anything we do in our marketing program, advertising, sales promo, anything, we
Resource
need to
allocation.
put cost onto it. How much is it going to cost? What are the expenditures, right? What kind of revenue based on our pricing and based on,
much
basic
can we
expenditures
afford to
and
have?
expenses, like kind of. What about, what's it going to look like financially, right? So we need to be thinking that way. But it gives us that kind of benefits, right? It forces us to look into the future, right? And that is a key thing. And so really it is a way of articulating intent in terms of strategy and intended performance. It sets that direction. It establishes those targets, and those targets, i.e. objectives, could be by way of market share. It could be gaining awareness. It could be financial goal. It could be a bunch of things, right? Those targets can come in a variety of shapes and sizes, depending on what we're trying to do. Key thing, whenever we talk about a marketing plan, is that it has to be implementable. It's very much an action-oriented document, and that is a key thing. So really, the overall purpose then is that for the marketer, for the marketing manager, And by the way, it is the marketing manager that is responsible with his staff to develop a marketing plan. You know, the overall purpose then can be a variety of reasons, like I just said, not the least of which is it allows them to stay in contact with the consumer. It allows them to identify who the competition is, which we've just been talking about. And it allows us really to control aspects and knowledge and everything associated with the competition and consumers. So it allows us also to adapt and adopt marketing strategies in response to changing and in anticipation of changing consumer needs and wants, tastes, and that kind of thing. It allows us to preempt, if we're doing it properly, potential deadly competitor actions. That is key. So yeah, it is very much that kind of a vibe that is important here. So how does it work? You'll see this, the version of this in your textbook too, by the way, a version of it in your textbook. So you will see, you know, we basically get data, determine where we are in time, analyze it accordingly, as you said, analyze it accordingly. Where are we in time? You know, where are we now? And where do we want to go in the future? And by the way, a lot of this information flows directly out of our SWOT analysis if we are doing it appropriately, doing it well. You know, SWOT will tell us where we are right now, you know, in terms of the opportunities, the threats, our strengths, our weaknesses. It'll tell us where we are right now. And flowing out of an analysis of SWOT should be, you know, a future orientation if we do it appropriately well. And though not really stated here, one key thing that I always say is that, you know, we should always include in our marketing plan a brand statement, a positioning statement also. A brand statement. What is the brand? What is the brand all about? What are we trying to do with the brand? Describe the brand personality, who's the brand for, what's the target market, basic characteristics of the target market. That's what a brand statement is all about. And then the positioning statement is really where does the brand reside in the mind of the consumer along some key attributes. That's what a positioning statement is all about. And those two things should be included in a marketing plan. Yep. Right, so then we determine, based on everything I've said, we determine our objectives, where we want to go, our overall strategies here. And then we, you know, put money to it. We determine, you know, some financial analysis at year 1 and year 2, you know, 3, 4, 5 into the future. We need to cost everything out. That is key. And then based on objectives, not only do objectives provide us guidance as to where we want to go in the future, but importantly, a key thing, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, anything in business, and get this in your mind right off the bat, if we do it in business, we must also think about measuring it. If we do it, how do we measure it? Right? So anything we do in business should be accompanied by an assessment of how to measure it. So therefore, when we talk about objectives, it is our objectives which really determine what kind of metrics and what kind of measures do we need to use in order to determine if we are moving towards our objectives. So if market share, for example, consistent with that example, if market share is an objective, then we would need to measure our sales, the competition sales, and engage in that kind of thing, right? And develop metrics like that based on assumptions. And we always need to build assumptions into a market plan, especially when we are talking about financials also, right? And that is especially true now, more so than ever before. You know, so if I was writing a market plan for any organization now, I would absolutely base much of my financial analysis on prevailing and anticipated interest rates, short-term interest rates, long-term interest rates, exchange rates possibly, and inflation and various other economic metrics. We would need to consider and use those as a basis for assumptions up front that we would use in the calculation of our financial analysis. Okay, so we need to use assumptions, is what I'm saying. So yeah, when we talk about a marketing plan, essentially in a very broad sense, there are three major components here. Where there's a background component, there's an emphasis on sort of a strategy, what we want to do, and then we get into, progress assessment and how we assess our progress accordingly. So there in your e-textbook, there is a very, very good little example of a marketing plan, which is contained in Appendix A of the textbook. And I would suggest that you would want to try to capture that one way or another, because in the future, if you are ever doing marketing plans and or business plans, the example that you see in Appendix A provides a very good little model and a detailed way of how you can do it. So in the future, if you need to do it, you can rely on that, and that's a good little template that you can use. Just saying. So, what's in it? All of these things pretty well are in it, right? And again, you will see this in the textbook, but I mean, typically it starts off with an executive summary of what the thing is all about, some background aspects, what the objectives are based on the corporate objectives, what are the marketing objectives, what is our overall marketing strategy, and then we get into the marketing program, and that is, importantly, that's really the core of the thing, and that is how do we configure our 4P framework, right? Our products, our promotion, our place, distribution, and pricing, right? Essentially. Yeah, that's the marketing program really. And then we get into the financial aspects. We cost it all out. We come up with some, projected financials for year 1 up to year 5, generally speaking. How are we going to monitor it and control it, right? How are we going to develop contingency plans, And that is the embedded kind of thing that we use in a marketing plan. And you'll see that in Appendix A, by the way. Are we good? So, in conclusion then, as we wrap up today, 2:45. It's okay? Yeah. In conclusion then, we realize that market structure analysis, critically important. It's all about thinking outside what's happening in the competitive landscape, who the competitors are, how we match up against them, war game it all out. That's the kind of thinking that we as professionals bring to bear, right? And so that is key. And marketing plans, absolutely, like I said, is contained in Appendix A. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is pretty well it. Next class, we will be talking about product decisions and new product in the strongest sense. I will also remind you that we do have a midterm exam coming up. And so in the strongest sense, I want everybody to excel. And so therefore, I strongly urge you to begin preparing immediately. Word of advice, those students who take my advice do very well, those that don't. So, but anyway, I strongly urge you to please start preparing immediately for the midterm exam, which is on the 1st of March, Friday evening. It will begin at 7:30. The outline says 7 o'clock. Because of room availability, we have to modify that to 7:30. So it will begin at 7:30 in the Odette Auditorium. Okay? I will tell you more about format and that kind of a thing later. Your job right now is to learn the subject matter. That's your job right now. Learn the subject matter, learn it well, and really know the stuff that we cover in class cold. Right? So that's an essential component. That's a big tip right there for those of you who were listening. Okay, so with that in mind, I will wish you all a very good evening.